Progress.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission for Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. Ms. Dow, could you please take the roll?
Chair Chang,
Here.
Vice Chair Aiken,
Here.
Commissioner Heckman,
Here.
Commissioner Suma. Here. We have a quorum.
Great. So our first order of business today is public comment regarding any items that are not on the agenda tonight. Ms. Dow, do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, I have one speaker card and one person on Zoom.
Okay, great. Let's hear from the first speaker. Why don't I see the hands raised on Zoom?
Oh, there.
Oh, there it is. Okay,
Okay.
so Lisa Lawson on Zoom.
Zoom.
Got it.
Yes, so
Okay.
first would be from James. Hello.
Thank you. I'm James Durand. I lived at 590 East Crescent Drive for 43 plus years. And I have my daughter, Lisa Lawson, who's on Zoom. And she's also a co-owner of the property. And she manages a lot of my affairs. And she's a big help to me on a day-to-day basis. And she also submitted a letter to the commission about the temporary berm that has been in the front of our house for nearly 4 years. She's here on Zoom. We'll be speaking to you about how the berm and the state of California's new daylighting law has eliminated the handicap accessibility to my house that I rely on a daily basis. I'd like to speak to you about other aspects of this project. The Transportation Department's plan for the berm at East Crescent and Southwood was the subject of much discussion by this commission on June 14th, 2023. The commission listened to my concerns and the concerns of others about the design. The commission was critical of the design proposed by the Transportation Department. The commission recognized it is my house and it is entirely impacted by the aesthetics of the giant berm. Excuse me. Several members of the PTC use phrases like, "We have not one in front of my house." "It is bizarre and looks too big for me." "Mr. Durand's bulb out needs to be completely rethought," and there are more. PTC observed that designers need aesthetic and functional feedback and would not be receptive to a permanent plan unless it addresses these issues. The PTC also said the new plan must pass another review by the PTC before it was submitted to the city council. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. My daughter's, who's on the Zoom, has submitted the transcript from the discussion. The commission directed the Transportation Department to redesign the berm with the input of myself. We had one brief meeting with the transportation staff and were hopeful that they would take our concerns into consideration. However, they did not. Instead, they sent us a copy of the new plan in November and does not change the original plan in any meaningful way. The only change they made was to shave off a few feet of the berm on one side and to extend the berm into a place where my caregivers have been parking, which would block me from being able to get out of the car and period. I'm here to ask you to direct the Transportation Department to take down the temporary berm in front of my house, which has been there for nearly 4 years, and direct them to redesign it with my disability access and aesthetics in mind. I'm running out of time, it looks like. I have 20 seconds. I think that's the end of it. I would very much appreciate your support and would now like to give my daughter, Lisa Lawson, a chance to come in on Zoom.
Thank you.
Next is on Zoom from Lisa Lawson.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for hearing our plight. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I submitted a detailed letter. I'm not sure if anybody had a chance to review it, but I wanted to highlight some of the facts and diagrams that have been submitted in it. As my father, my 87-year-old father noted, we discussed this berm extensively at the June 14, 2023 meeting. Nearly 2 years later, we finally have what is now supposed to be the final version of this berm. Even though the Transportation Department was directed to reconsider it and make it more appealing, they have failed to do so. And Madam Clerk, if you could please call up the first image that I sent to you, I would appreciate it. That's the very first one of the three. This is the plan that has been submitted to us by Panchal Churag, indicating what the permanent berm will look like. You can see that the red line on the outside of the right side depicts where the original berm was, and they have noted that there's 4 feet that has now been pulled in from that berm. You can see, however, that they have also extended the berm beyond the walkway where my dad currently uses in order to gain access to his house. When Mr. Churag sent us this final design, he told us that there would be no further discussion regarding it. The city was already building construction plans to implement it. And he said that we should be satisfied with it because it takes into consideration our concern that the pathway that my dad uses in order to access his house would be still accessible. He said, quote, "This ensures the existing walkway path to your front door, which facilitates easy pickup and drop-off access, is retained." That access is, as you will see from the next slide, Madam Clerk, if you could please advance the slides. That, as you can see, is a permanent walkway that my dad uses because he can no longer drive and is dependent on caregivers to bring him to and from his house, as well as Uber drivers. He currently does not have a walker, but will be prescribed one in March, and it is anticipated he will have a wheelchair soon after that. As you can see from, if you've read anything about the daylighting laws that were implemented in January of this year, which KQED describes as the most talked about law in California, parking in that space is not allowed. Indeed, parking within 15 feet of the beginning or end of a berm is not allowed. And Madam Clerk, could you please advance the slides to the third slide? I've marked up exactly what these daylighting laws, which is AB 413. I apologize, I said it was Senate bill, it's Assembly Bill 413, interpreted how that applies to this berm, which once again, this berm is larger than anything the city of Palo Alto has ever implemented. And you can see from the second, or actually the third slide, that this completely eliminates not only parking that is accessible to my dad's house, but parking far beyond that. It essentially cuts off any disability access that my father, who is 87 years old, needs in order to access his house. The berm is temporary. It's been there for 4 years. I believe that you would have the power to have it dismantled and direct the planning department, who has failed to consider the ramifications of AB 413 and how they play out with this design. I believe you have the authority to direct them to dismantle it and come back with a new design. And that's what we're asking that you do today. And we appreciate your consideration. If you have time, I would appreciate you reviewing the rest of the letter. I wanted to be short and to the point tonight. And given that a picture connotes 1,000 words, I thought that these slides would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I just wanted to let members of the public know that we cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda, nor can we make decisions on them. But we heard your public comment, so thank you. So our next order of business is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Is there anything, Ms. Armour?
None.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I joined at 6:05. Thanks.
Yes. Let the record show that Commissioner Templeton is here. And that takes us to city official reports. Ms. Armour?
Yes, thank you. Give us a moment while we bring up the presentation. As usual, we'll keep this pretty quick. Just some updates on our upcoming meetings.
Pardon me,
Yes?
I'm seeing another raised hand online, and I don't know if that was there already before the public comments finished.
Might have been just as we were moving on. So do you want to take the comment?
Yeah, let's
Or-
just take the comment.
Okay, so one more.
But I'm not sure, I mean, the hand is now gone, so I don't know if, oh, nope, it's back up. Okay.
Okay, from Mr. John Hanna.
Hello, this is John Hanna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I wonder if you had a chance to read the email letter that I sent in to you all on this subject. If so, then that says everything I really need to say.
We received the letter. I can't speak as to whether or not everybody's read it, but we've received it.
Okay. I just want to emphasize one thing, that from the comments that we had at the commission hearing that I referred to in my letter, it was pretty clear that almost unanimously the commissioners did not like this berm and told the staff so, and told them to go back and redesign it. And but apparently that advice or request has just been forgotten about or ignored. And we would really appreciate it if some direction would be given to take into consideration what Mr. Duran and his daughter have said. And some of the neighbors too are not really very happy about the size of this berm. And there also seems to be some controversy about whether it's going to really add to safety there. It really narrows the distance between two passing cars at the intersection of East Crescent and Southwood. So there's very little room for them to pass because the berm juts way out into the street, and we're not sure that that doesn't create a different hazard from the one that they're worried about now, which is cars going too fast around the corner and ignoring the stop sign. So that's about all I have to say, and I hope you will take these comments into serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're not allowed to discuss it, but we can certainly ask staff for more information on it in terms of confirming what the timeline is and what's been done by transportation and what the process is before it is finalized. So, and okay, great. So Ms. Armour, it would be really helpful if you could help us follow up with that.
Thank you.
Okay, on to the staff report, or the city official report.
All right, we'll bring that up again. All right, so quick listing of the upcoming items for your February meetings. On February 12th, we expect to have a discussion first of a comprehensive plan amendment to consider allowing car-free streets, specifically with a potential resolution to implement that on portions of Ramona Street and California Avenue. We then will also have a parking programs update and discussion. And the chair has requested that we add what should be a relatively short item to discuss procedural rules. Specifically, there was a discrepancy in the amount of time for public comment and how that can be modified. And we want that to be consistent with our other boards and commissions. So then on February 26th, we have a planned home zone that is returning to you now that the environmental review is complete, and an update on the bike and pedestrian plan. Then on the next slide, we have some upcoming items One is, actually a recap, update to provide to you from the January 21st meeting of City Council that they did approve some zoning ordinance updates in relation to the housing element. This was something that was recommended by Planning and Transportation Commission back in November. Second reading will be next week, no, in 2 weeks. And then we do have a public meeting that we've scheduled on February 6th. So that's next week, Thursday evening, about the Stream Corridor Protection Ordinance update to get some public discussion going, talk with them about what is currently being considered and get their input before we bring it back to you for consideration and recommendation. And then on February 10th, City Council has scheduled consideration of the zoning change for the project at 3265 El Camino Real. This is one that you considered and recommended at your last meeting. And I believe that is all we have for my report. But if you have any questions, I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then tonight we have, I wanted to ask, does the Office of Transportation have anything that they would like to add?
I believe we have, do we have Raphael available for that today? Okay. Not, so I think we can, if you would like to. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sylvia Starlack, Transportation Planning Manager. I'm happy to introduce Lily Lim Tsao, our interim Chief Transportation Official. She joins us here from the city of San Jose most recently, and she's with us until we find a permanent CTO. Lily, would you like to say a few words? You can use this one.
All right. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me here. And I hope to be very productive and constructive in the 3 months or 4 months that the city is recruiting for the permanent position. I come from San Jose as the Assistant Director over Transportation Department, having overseen the administration to operations to the Planning and Maintenance Division. So I'm very well versed in the traffic engineering world, and I hope to be able to contribute to the max while I'm here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for stepping in. Okay, is that it for the city official reports? Okay, so tonight we've got 2 special presentations, and the first one is a VTA speed and reliability program presentation. And I'm not sure who's presenting, but take it away, Ms. Armour.
Thank you. We do have guests here. I believe they are joining us online. Let's check and see. And they've got a PowerPoint presentation as well, so we'll bring that up. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tamiko Purcell. I'm a senior transportation planner from BTA, and I lead our speed and reliability program, which is our effort to make transit reliably faster. I'm here with our engagement consultant, Frank Ponciano from Winter Consulting, and we are doing some public engagement right now for a couple of efforts that we wanted to talk to you about. You can go to the next slide. And hopefully get a little feedback, particularly on our second effort. So just for some context, we are working towards VTA's visionary network. Last year, our board of directors adopted this vision for a lot more transit service in the future. We kind of consider it our North Star for more service. And at the core of the visionary network is higher frequencies. So this is where buses and trains would arrive sort of every 10 minutes on our frequent network routes. There would be expanded hours of operation, 24-hour service network, greater service on weekends. So that's more frequency and longer hours on Saturdays and Sundays, and a larger service area and expanded routes for better regional connections. Next slide, please. So the speed and reliability program is focused on operation and infrastructure treatments that improve speed, which is how quickly a bus travels over the course of its route, and reliability, which is how consistently a bus moves with predictable travel times. Speed and reliability is necessary for us to deliver those higher frequencies in the visionary network. Because faster transit is much more cost effective, it allows us to save money that can go into delivering higher frequencies. And will also be a lot more buses on the road if this vision, if we're able to implement the full vision, which means that we need our buses to be operating very efficiently at nice spacing and using that limited space in the right lane to the best purpose we can. Next slide. Just in case you're not familiar, this is our frequent network map. So these are the routes that we are focused on for the higher frequencies. Hopefully in the future, there would be even more. For Palo Alto's purposes, the 522, Rapid 522, and the local route 22 are the two frequent network routes that service Palo Alto. Next slide. So we have two phases of our current outreach. Phase one I'm going to talk about, and phase two Frank will talk about. So in our first phase, we're focused on what's called the Transit Reliability Improvement and Performance System, or TRIPS. And this particular project is really just a fancy name for saying that we're developing a countywide transit signal priority system. So we're figuring out how to make it work across all the jurisdictions in Santa Clara County, so our entire frequent network would have TSP deployed on it. And then the second one is a study to help, hopefully, people transition from paying cash to using a Clipper card or credit card or app or something like that. Next slide. So just for TSP, if you're not familiar, TSP improves transit flow by adjusting traffic signals so buses get extended green lights or shorter red lights. So it's not about cutting off everybody for transit to get through an intersection. It's just about holding the green light a little bit longer so the bus can make it through, or shortening it so the bus is not waiting quite as long. It has a lot of benefits for transit, reduces the variability in our trip times, reduces our bus travel times, and improves our schedule reliability. It's really great for rider experience because it minimizes delays, minimizes the bus bunching, which is where the buses arrive at stops grouped together, and then there might be a long break and then another bus. It helps us keep them more evenly spaced. And it supports more efficient transit operations and corridor performance. There's obviously some challenges balancing the transit signal priority with all the traffic flow, the side street access to an intersection. Sometimes there's concerns about there being too much delay there, and prioritizing multiple routes in a corridor. So in this case, on El Camino, it would be both the 22 and the 522 operate in the corridor. So we work with cities on the challenges of which route comes first and how do we make those decisions. And then probably the biggest challenge for transit signal priority is that the effectiveness really depends on city policies. So if a city has a policy to prioritize transit at an intersection, TSP will work a lot better than if a city is prioritizing, say, vehicles at the intersection. So now Frank is going to talk about what we've heard during the public engagement process that's relevant for Palo Alto, and then talk about the other project and hopefully get some feedback on how we can engage more people in Palo Alto. Frank?
Thanks, Tomiko. We go on to the next slide and just refreshing folks' memories. Tomiko, as Tomiko introduced me, and Frank, I'm the lead outreach consultant on this particular project. And in the last 2 months, we've been really busy getting the word out and getting a lot of feedback focused on TSP and speed and reliability broadly as it relates to the frequent network, VTA's frequent network. Most of that work has happened in January. All in all, we've got 29 events all over Santa Clara County, over 1,000 unique interactions with community members, 10 focus groups in total, 13 community event pop-up booths, 6 community meeting presentations, and the breakdown on the geography of it is there listed as well, noting that there has been actually with this particular conversation, 2 conversations have happened in Palo Alto itself. So we go on to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about what we've heard specifically as it relates to the routes and the corridors that involve Palo Alto. Obviously, Palo Alto Transit Center, the picture actually we had in the last slide, and it comes up again later in the presentation, was the pop-up that we had at Palo Alto Transit Center actually last week. And we heard loud and clear that it is a key transfer point for people that are actually maybe coming from San Mateo or working in San Mateo, commuting from Santa Clara County. And so there is a lot of interagency transfers happening, and people express frustration about what they understood to be a lack of synchrony between agencies in terms of schedules, but also people brought up the bottlenecks that come up all along El Camino Real broadly. Obviously, traffic impacts both the 22 and 522 routes. People were much more pleased with 522 in terms of getting them from end to end faster because it's a rapid route. But of course, people were frustrated with the very slow speeds at times with Route 22 along some of the bottlenecks that they find on El Camino Real. Move on to the next slide. And so, as you saw in the timeline a little bit earlier, we are at the end of this first phase of community engagement and conversations specifically on TSP. The conversations, of course, have focused on what are the priority locations, priority corridors, areas and routes that we should really focus on implementing these improvements so that we have more frequent, faster service. And so what we're doing now that we are wrapping up community engagement is we're taking that data and we're also combining what we've learned on real world data in order to set priorities and guide future grant applications, policy coordination with local cities. We're going to move on to the next slide. And I believe we now move on to talk about what's coming up. So as you see there, starting this month, we're already gearing up for the conversation on what we call FBS, Clipper Retail Network and Cashless Fare Payment Barrier Study. And that'll take us through the end of the year with a pilot program that we are sort of ideating around, and we'll be engaging the community around in the next couple of months, happening in the summer. And so it's going to be, more work ahead and much more conversation. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But I want to give you a little bit of context around why we're putting on this effort to begin with. So we go on to the next slide. The fact is that when somebody uses cash to pay their fares as they're boarding a VTA bus, on average, it takes that person 12 seconds in order to complete payment and board. That's not necessarily a problem, but on a busy stop like Palo Alto Transit Center, let's say, where we may have 5 people that are boarding the bus and paying with cash, well, that's an added minute. And now that bus is delayed. And so obviously the more that grows, the more it scales. The alternative is they use a method of payment that doesn't involve cash, and that decreases the amount of time that it takes to board by over 90%. So that is significant, and it plays such an important role in allowing us to really optimize for faster, more reliable service. And so we're really focused on figuring out how can we address this. We go on to the next slide because, of course, accessibility concerns arise when we talk about sort of emphasizing non-cash fare payment, namely seniors, immigrant communities, the unhoused, and other folks that use the bus, VTA's bus service regularly and oftentimes, pay in cash as their only method, don't have the access to devices that enable this kind of contactless payment, or may not have physical access to locations where they can purchase a Clipper card, or frankly, they may not have the know-how. There may not have been the information sharing that is needed for somebody to know how they can access these options of payment. And so we want to be mindful of the fact that, you know, there are some barriers there. And whatever solution we ultimately test and implement needs to take that into consideration. And if we establish what those barriers are and we address them, hopefully we arrive at the best case scenario. Now, that's what the next number of conversations are going to be about. We go on to the next slide. In the months of March and April, we're going to be back out to the community and going to be having 10 focus groups, 8 community presentations, and up to 16 community event pop-up booths all over the county of Santa Clara in order to have a conversation that focuses on that specific question. We want to use the learnings from this outreach that we have in March and April in order to plan and ultimately run a pilot program that tests what approaches can address the concern of lowering the amount of time that it takes to pay the fare, that also prioritize accessibility and equity. That's really at the crux of what we're trying to do. So we go on to the next slide. And then, of course, we'll take questions and have conversation here. But just for you all to think about ways in which you can help us to really most efficiently reach communities in Palo Alto and in all along the county and North County too. What are some of those important Palo Alto organizations or community leaders that we should include in a focus group kind of conversation, or we could go on and have a community meeting presentation to them? That's one question. And then the second question is, are there any events that you know are coming up in March and April that are big in the city that we should make sure to have a presence at? Those are our main 2 questions, but we are happy to take your questions as well. And let me just check, Tamiko, is there anything that you would like to add to anything I said? Okay. Any questions from the commission?
First, I'm just going to give the public a chance to raise their hand if they have any comments about this, because this is, you know, we don't have a stated on our agenda room for public comments, but we do want to hear from people if they do have comments. And then in the meantime, why don't we see if the commission has any questions or comments? It works. Commissioner Templeton.
Hi, thank you guys for that great presentation. I'm very interested in getting more activity on the VTA up here in Palo Alto, and I think that your efforts are going to help with that. The first thing I'm thinking of is early on when Tamiko was presenting, there was a slide that said we need the city's cooperation to do the light timing, and I'm thinking about the 22 and the 522, which are riding up and down El Camino, which are the state-owned street, and all of the light timing there is negotiated with the state. So what do you think Palo Alto can do? What kind of cooperation from the city are you actually looking for from us for that?
So anytime we have these conversations, obviously Caltrans is a key player at the table, but these decisions are almost always made with BTA, Caltrans, and city staff, even though Caltrans is controlling the signals. So we're really looking for staff support to prioritize transit at the intersection is kind of the key part that would help us a lot. I think Caltrans is actually moving in that direction where they are starting to prioritize transit more, but all being on the same page is really helpful.
Thanks. I will ask the staff as well here in the city if there's anything you need from us in order to support that.
Thank you.
You want to chime in? Where? I don't think we need anything. I'm going to say a little bit more about the role of transit. So, I mean, it's obviously really important in our town. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as far as organizations to be working with in Palo Alto, this is potentially obvious or potentially not what you're looking for, but I'll tell you the people that I think could really benefit from understanding and using an improved VTA service in our city. You've mentioned a few, but I'm especially thinking about the younger people. So I would suggest working with the PAUSD district and the PTAs that are involved there, because we really do encourage our students to find alternate ways to get to school. Many of them will bring bikes or they'll ride the bus home, and figuring out how to make that work better for them would be really beneficial overall for our community, because not everybody lives right off of El Camino. So we have to think about what are your connections and how many bike racks and all those many things that I'm sure you guys would hear about from them. Thank you.
Other commissioners? Ms. Dow, are there any public comments that have come in?
I have no raised hands
Okay.
or.
Then I have a quick comment or question. The first one is, does all that is going on with the new national administration affect this project at all?
Currently, no. We actually did hear from the grantor at the federal government, and they said that it appears that since our agreement is already executed, that it should be fine to keep us moving forward. But of course, things unfold pretty quickly. So we will keep everyone posted if something changes. But for now, we're moving forward as planned.
That's great to hear. And then in response to your question about groups in Palo Alto where it may be helpful to work with, much as Commissioner Templeton said, I agree that you should talk to the schools, but specifically there's a city school subcommittee of the city council that might be valuable. There's also the Safe Routes to School group, which is a partnership between PAUSD and the city, and that's probably got, you know, the absolute key people. Along those lines, the students I know trying to go to Gunn High School have continually struggled with the bus routes with BTA. In fact, my neighbor just last week knocked on my door to say, could my student hitch a ride with your son because the bus stop down the street is going away. So I'm sure Gunn High School in particular, I know would have a lot of feedback. And additional groups that are citizen groups that are pretty, like, so the Palo Alto Payback, the bicycle coalition, I think might be really, is that the name of it, Ms. Lack? Palo Alto Bicycle Advisory.
Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Okay, pedestrian, yeah, that group. I just know the acronym. And then our senior nonprofit Avenidas might be a very helpful group to reach out to as well. And then Commissioner Suma.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a list of 5 groups that you might want to reach out to, and the ones that have not been mentioned are the Opportunity Center, and the gentleman who runs that will be running our new transitional housing out in the Bay, basically lands, which it currently is not served by a bus, and we were hoping that that would be an additional bus route that could help out those people. And then Alta Housing was the other one that I was thinking of, and they operate most of our below market rate programs. Thanks.
It looks like we got Commissioner Heckman. Is that right?
No, Ghostlight.
Oh, Ghostlight. Okay. It's confusing here.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you said, Chair. I'm wondering if middle college, I don't think it's just Gunn, but I would say middle college needs to be addressed as well. So which is a new high school located on the Fidel campus. Thanks.
Yes. But more broadly, our community colleges is a good group to reach out to. And since they all have partnerships with the high schools, Middle College is the partnership in our area. Yeah. Oh, Veterans Association was another one. Okay. I don't see other lights from the commissioners. So then thank you both for coming and for sharing this information with us. And we look forward to hearing more.
Thanks.
Okay, so our next special presentation is the Via Palo Alto Link update.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Nate Baird. I am your parking and Palo Alto Link Programs Manager in the Office of Transportation. I have two representatives from VIA here today to talk a little bit about Palo Alto Link and share with you. There's no staff report. This was a request by VIA to just introduce themselves, kind of review what we've been doing. You know, the Palo Alto Link program began as an 18-month pilot. We're now have funding through a little over 2 years, but beyond that, we're basically kind of still in a sort of a pilot phase where we're kind of making adjustments, trying to take in feedback, trying to find the operating model and the kind of funding arrangement that makes the most sense for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Krista. Krista Glotzbach and Mikhail DeVay, who's supporting her. But thanks so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you so much for allowing us the time. It's great to see you to talk about Link. Krista, I live here in Menlo Park. Mikhail was born and raised here in Palo Alto, so we're also users of the service. VIA is the company behind Palo Alto Link. We are a global company. We have about 700 different transit agency and city partners that we serve to help make transit better. If you go to the slide, go ahead, forward a little bit more. I'm going to go through the slides at a decent pace to give you a chance to ask questions. I think you're all familiar with it and hopefully have seen the vehicles around town. These are some of your other neighbors that also have the service. On the next slide, we zone in a little bit more on a few brand new ones in the region. Go ahead to the next slide. The Bayview Shuttle is a new 9 EV shuttle service in the Bayview neighborhood in San Francisco. It's become very popular in a very short period of time. Silicon Valley Hopper, you might be familiar with. It has been, originally was in Cupertino and then expanded to Santa Clara through a grant from the state, and has become quite a popular service there. And Richmond, California. All of these services emphasize being able to help people get around their neighborhoods, but also connect to transit. It was really nice to hear VTA speak and talk about increased frequency of buses because all of these systems are integrated and we want to help get people places faster. So we know when VTA is coming, we're trying to get people to meet the buses to take their longer trips on public transit. That's a main use of microtransit today. On the next slide, we'll go one more. We'll talk a little bit, go into Palo Alto Link and how the service works. Hopefully you've seen it, the Teslas or the minivans around town, application-based. You go in and order a vehicle. When you order a car, it's very likely that that car will have one of your neighbors in it when it arrives. These are all shared rides that the service is delivering. So it's public transit meant to reach people that aren't otherwise on a bus line or on a convenient, method for getting transit. On the next slide, I put a picture of the vehicle, but I saw lots of nods. You have seen them around town. And on the next slide, we show a little bit of a graph about what is going on, what the growth has been like. I love the map that you're looking at on the left because it shows where those dots are all where ride requests have come from. So you see how the service is quite a bit different than a standard shuttle that would be along a line and people would get on it when they're close to it. Everywhere that Palo Alto Link serves, people are calling it, and they're going from one place to another within town. They're going to Caltrain, they're going to the Stanford Research Park, and a lot of these very popular destinations around town. It's grown about almost 30% year over year, as you've seen. Well, March will be our 2-year anniversary running the service here. So it's very popular and it's grown over time. In fact, it's continued to grow even when we did introduce fares in December. So it's, holiday times give it some volatility, but the slightly increased fares have not impacted ridership to the negative. So it's continued to be very popular. On the next slide, we compare a little bit with your neighbors. One way that we measure how good a microtransit service is utilization. So how often are these rides shared? How many passengers is each vehicle carrying per vehicle hour? Palo Alto has very strong utilization, over 3, and we compare to a few of your neighbors here just for similar demographics, similar types of services. We wanted you to see that it's a very strong, popular service, and it's making good use of the dollars that you invest in it because we're carrying a lot of people per passenger hour. The demographics of who this serves are an important part of this. We really want transit to reach the people who need transit the most. These are self-reported with surveys that we put out over the Palo Alto Link application. 60% of riders identify as minorities, 57% say that they make less than $100,000 a year, and 23% of riders have a long-term disability. We continue to put these surveys out so that we understand as much as we can about the riders and make sure we're doing the things in the application and with the service that serve the people that you would like us to be serving. On the next slide, we show a couple of the people that came to visit City Council last time, back in November. This gentleman is a fantastic man. His child is a special needs child who uses the service to volunteer at the VA. And it was a very important service to him and to senior friends of his. On the next slide, gentleman named BJ talks about how he's come to Palo Alto and he lives here really to be able to access the Stanford Hospital and how critical it was for him to go to and from the hospital without any other ability to drive there himself. These stories are anecdotal, but they're very impactful, and residents I know wrote into City Council as well just to express support for the service overall. Not only are we supporting individuals and what they need, we're also supporting the city. We're working to reduce congestion and we're working to reduce emissions. These are measurements that show how many single occupancy vehicle trips we are taking off the road because these people are going in shared rides instead. So we estimate about 19,000 of those in 2024 alone. And then the other estimate, we look at actually the emissions themselves and how much emissions we're decreasing. This is from a combination of the electric vehicles that we are using in much of the service, some of the service, as well as those shared rides. So not having single occupancy vehicles on the road. This may be a little bit of an eye chart, but I'll describe what you're seeing here because it is interesting. The dark green, kind of the center of that dark green space, we have dropped onto this map a person we call Jane. Jane is helping us measure how long it takes to get anywhere else in the city. So in the map on the left, we're showing the Link service along with VTA, the buses, Caltrain, using the public transit that exists. How long does it take Jane to get anywhere else in Palo Alto? So you'll see comparing the map on the left, the map on the right, that green area is how far Jane can get in 30 minutes, basically. So Jane can access much, much more of Palo Alto and she can reach downtown within 30 minutes. So what we're really trying to do is give people access in a reasonable amount of time. And this is an interesting chart showing how many more people now can access much more of town within 30 minutes. We show the same thing on the next slide, looking specifically at the VA, and you can see that 13 times more people can reach the VA hospital within 45 minutes. Again, Jane in the dark green, and then the expanded green showing a 30-minute window, and then the color outside of that, how far she can get in 45 minutes. It's a really fun tool to play with. Really importantly, I want to mention Stanford Research Park, who's been a partner with Palo Alto Link since very early on. They originally, before we started working with you, had a shuttle that was fine, but wasn't super effective. They were looking for an on-demand type solution in order to serve the park. So they decided to partner with Palo Alto and have the Palo Alto Link service also serve their community with on-demand shared rides. They contribute about 1/3 of the funding to the service. This is, again, a model for the community because all of our partners in California would really love if the businesses helped contribute to the transportation service. So it's a really good example of how this can work in partnership with the community. And you can see HP, Tesla, we have strong supporters at Sanford Research Park, and we go present to them and make sure they're excited about the service ongoing as well. Talking about the funding specifically, about 1/3 today is allocated by the city of Palo Alto. 1/3 is Stanford Research Park, as I mentioned. And the other 1/3, we've worked with Palo Alto to achieve grants that will help fill that last 1/3. So most of that now is the VTA Measure B grant. That's a grant that also funds Cupertino. The new Sunnyvale service is going in. So VTA has opted to fund these services instead of just running it themselves. That Sunnyvale service is VTA's own service though, so they are looking at running these themselves soon. So this is how the service is funded today. We're working with your team members in order to figure out that last 1/3 going forward. The Measure B grant, the next one is due at the end of February. You can go ahead to the next slide. And so we're working on that application right now with your team to make sure we apply for that grant. And then we will hear at the end of May whether or not the city has been able to secure that grant. And there are also community groups that we are looking to, again, in cooperation with the city, to see if there might be some interest in contributing that last 1/3 of the funds to help Palo Alto Link run at the capacity it is right now. It's really quite ideal. It's, going to almost to all the boundaries of the city and has the right number of vehicles to have lower wait times, things like that. So maintaining the existing funding really helps maintain the quality of service that we have today in Palo Alto. Lastly, I just want to say that we're very, very committed to you and to this service and making sure it runs the way that you want to. Over time, we have made adjustments to it. We try to be very adaptive, helping with the grants, as we mentioned, making the service nimble and adaptable. When we were told that students were really encouraged to ride their bikes, and not necessarily great to have students depending on this type of service to get to school, we put in some new rules, some new boundaries to help make it so that during the school bus hours, during the hours right when students are arriving and departing school, weren't an easy time to get a link. That didn't make a lot of sense because it conflicted with bike riding, for example. So we've worked with the city to implement these types of things to help really meet the goals that you have for the service. We've engaged with the community. We visit senior centers and teach people how to use the application. So it's very easy for them to order it on their own. And we use data we get from the service to continue to refine and make the service better. Little things like, if a vehicle doesn't have a passenger, where does it sit and wait so that it's, anticipating the next ride? Those things are very important to keeping emissions low and keeping the wait times low. So we're constantly adapting the service in order to be tuned into that. And that's really one of the reasons we're here, is we're eager for your feedback, eager for your input, and obviously eager to do what we can to help make sure the service is able to keep running. And that's all I had today. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to invite members of the public to raise their hands if they have any comments about this presentation. And again, in the meantime, we'll take questions and comments from commissioners. I don't see any light. Oh, Chair Templeton. I'm so tired, Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's exciting to see how many seniors you're serving. So what is the drop off and pickup procedure for people with infirmities like that, or that may have difficulty entering and exiting?
The drivers are trained very much to work with people with disabilities of many types of disabilities. We also, you've probably seen, there are wheelchair accessible vehicles. So basically the drivers are trained. We also have notes in the app itself so that if
But
someone.
they like don't have to go down the street or wait like in
Right,
things
right.
like that.
If anyone, if you specify that you need the vehicle to come door to door, it will come directly to your door. It won't
Okay.
stop down the street. So
All right.
yes, those accommodations are
I'm
in
going to
there.
throw you a curveball here,
Let's go.
and it's okay if you don't have an answer for this.
Okay.
But what would happen if I called for a pickup at 590 East Crescent Drive?
I need to plug that into my map really quickly. Is that not in the zone?
We just saw a picture of it this morning or earlier this evening.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mikhail was paying better attention than I
Oh,
was.
thank you.
If the vehicle like just can't get to where they're going to be, they have, you're on an app, so they have text that they can text the passenger. So they would go as close as they could to the place they need to be, and then they would text or have dispatch call the passenger to tell them where they are. But they can see it on the map, so they would just get as close as they can. Are you saying if it's a rider with a disability and then they need to get out?
Well, yes, there was some conjecture about how that is being experienced by a resident, and that's not your issue, but I'm just trying to emphasize and give transportation an opportunity to weigh in about how this service provided by the city that is agendized would handle a situation like that, where, given the state laws, would prohibit you guys from getting close to that particular residence. Thank you.
Commissioner, I can answer, maybe describe the condition in which a standing vehicle would be allowed to get as close to the property as possible. The daylighting law is intended for long-term parking. And you can say maybe a 2-minute parker, maybe it's too long already, but this is where we anticipate the via the shuttle would be staffed with the driver and move as quickly as he or she can possibly do so. So I think you can still get close to the property.
Thank you for answering that question. I think it's really important, and clearly the public wants to know. So it's really good to get that information out there. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up question because the subject came up. So does the daylighting law in general allow like pick up and drop off loading zone in those daylighted areas?
It is not intended for that purpose, but it doesn't also require curbs. So the idea is that the space would remain open generally at all times for pedestrian visibility and bicycle visibility, crossing visibility, but there are conditions which we can't avoid and
right. And it's unlikely a citation would occur.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I have a question. It was about the school zone exclusions. So is that a blanket school zone exclusion? And so that if there is a disabled student, or students by and large are very able-bodied, but they're also very active. And so there's lots of broken legs and ACL tears and that kind of a thing. And so I was just curious about the school zone exclusion and whether it was a blanket exclusion or whether this could be used in the situation where a student has a disability.
Yeah, I believe that they can in the app if they are indicated as disabled, or they can call.
Got it. That's great to hear. That's great to hear because I could see it being very, very useful to families in that situation. And my other question is about funding, which is it was unclear, Mr. Baird, about what you said about the funding that Palo Alto has signed up for. Is it only good through the 2-year anniversary through March, or does it extend past that?
So we have funding currently through June of this year.
Okay.
And that is through a combination of the Innovative Transit Grant, a TFCA grant, which is an air quality grant that helped us convert fully to EV and hybrid. And then, Stanford Research Park and the city council funds are both kind of sort of locked in, but that the grant portions are, those funds we will need to reapply for. Previously, the innovative transit was only if you were brand new. They actually changed the rule recently so that we can reapply for that innovative transit grant, but we do need to apply for it. And
So
that
when
is
you said the city 1/3 is locked in, that's
Not so
locked
much
in
locked in, but-
beyond June then, or?
Well, council has basically discussed a willingness to continue to fund that amount. And obviously, every year there's funding discussions, and so those types of parameters can change. But we expect at this point for city council to continue to be willing to fund at the level that they've funded at potentially. But again, those discussions are in flux. There's a lot of movement right now generally with funding and how funding works, right? And so we are working really hard to both get the funding that we've received thus far. We were going to reapply to both of those funding opportunities. And then as via folks were talking about, we will also be trying to work with other local community groups and businesses like SRP, but others in that same sort of parameters who get a lot of trips. We want to see if they could become funding partners in the future as well. So we're trying to address from all avenues, but it is a lot. There is still a lot in flux right now.
Can you just remind me what the total budget is for, or how much is either the Palo Alto contribution or the total?
So it's roughly about 120, 130K per month.
That's the total?
That's the total amount.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, I see another question from Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. Yeah, just thinking about the funding question, and this is for city staff, but you guys pipe in if you know the information. Just thinking about one of the pieces of information that wasn't in the presentation is how many students are using this service. And I'm thinking about the previous presentation about the VTA increasing the utilization of that. And I'm wondering, how much do you think the city is funding for students to use this service versus what it would cost to fund a VTA pass for students? Do we know that comparison? I don't expect you to know it off the top of your head, but that's something that we always grapple with. Oh, it's too expensive to get students to have a bus pass. But we are providing an equivalent type of service that we're funding from the city. Have we ever thought about comparing those two?
So because of this concern, as Krista noted, we have changed that. So students cannot use the service to go to school.
Oh, I'm not speaking about school.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just thinking about what type of people are using the service and whether many students who are using the service are not doing it to get to and from school during the regular busing hours. They're doing it for after school activities or going to study with a friend, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Can you tell me your?
I want to know
question again?
what percentage of the funding that the city is giving to this program, like, can we put a dollar amount on it versus if we were to subsidize bus passes?
I see. Okay, yeah, I do not have that data.
We don't have to have it right now, but if that is something, do you guys know how many students are riding in our chart, like what the percentage of students?
We changed the fares so there isn't a special fare there anymore. So we don't always know if it's a student that's riding the service. And we've since made it so that we don't run during the student hours. So we can definitely do this in our next survey and find out and get a good number for
I
you.
think it would be really interesting.
Sure.
And not because I don't appreciate this program, but because this is something that we've talked about for many years and we need to understand what is the direction and,
Sure.
what if it turns out that this is a better value? We don't know, but we should have that information and that may help us decide better how to fund and where to fund in the future. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So just a comment about Link and VTA. Link gives access to many places in town, almost all places in town. VTA is very limited in where it runs in town, right, for where students want to go. You know, we have very few lines if you look at to compare. So a more
I'm
apt
aware that the
comparison.
challenge of being in the north part of
Yes.
the county, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't need both. I'm just trying to
Correct.
understand
Correct.
and be intentional
Yeah.
about what we're doing with that money. Also, one of the things we hear from the BTA service is, well, you guys don't use it. Why should we run more? Why should we run more routes? And so if we understood that, and imagine if every student in this city had a bus pass, they would use it more and there'd be more routes as a
Right.
result.
Yeah, there is definitely interest amongst staff in pursuing that kind of situation. So
It's
thanks
all
for that.
related and reading what's popular right now. So it's just interesting information, and I'm glad you guys are looking into it. And I appreciate what you guys have done for the community, not just the seniors and the students, but anybody who needs help getting around when the car isn't working. So thank you.
Sure.
One more quick question. This is sort of a preview into our next agenda item, which is the study session on Safe Streets for All. You had mentioned that your data gathering has been a little bit different now because it was done based on fares before. And so there was something about in our Safe Streets for All plan that talked about equity and the access. So is there any way to track or to understand what role Palo Alto Link is playing with respect to certain groups of people, be it students or seniors or people who are lower income or so just wondering what data is available.
Sure. All of the origin destination data is available. So that is one, just to check that box. You know, we know everything about where every vehicle came and went to. And then any category that is selected as far as youth or senior or wheelchair, you know, need a wheelchair, that is all within the software as well. So we share all of that. Palo Alto has access to all of that data. So we'd be thrilled to help.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know if there was, so what about, I doubt we have this, the income component, right? So there's a map in the Safe Street, the Safe Streets for All plan that talks about income levels. And if we were to find out, for example, that this is a key part of transportation for people who are lower income, then that might be useful information to all the granting agencies.
Yeah, we
know
still
that?
do provide a low income discount within the app. So there's still an opportunity for folks to self-select into that. We don't do a lot. We wouldn't get a specific number per se, but we do have a recommendation in app about a yearly amount, and you can opt for that for the $2 fare discount.
Okay, thank you. There is one hand up now, and so since there aren't a ton of public speakers, I thought maybe we would give that speaker 3 minutes to.
Yeah, we have one person on Zoom, Penny Elson.
Hi, this is Penny Elson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to express that I think Link is a poorly conceived city program. Excuse me. It's an example of the city chasing grant dollars without paying close enough attention to long-term fiscal and mode choice effects of the program. It subsidizes car trips, incentivizing people to acquire the habit of picking up their cell phone to call for a taxpayer subsidized car ride when they want to get somewhere in town. This undermines mode shift efforts and transit use. If the city's going to provide subsidized cars trips, it should only subsidize trips for people who can demonstrate financial and physical need for such subsidy. We should use a means test to qualify people for it, as most government programs do. Further, the program in its current grant-dependent design is fiscally unsustainable. When the city's grant runs out, city taxpayers will be paying much more to subsidize each ride. In a year when the city staff told Finance Committee we can't afford to restore a fire engine at Mitchell Park Fire Station, it's disappointing that they approved the luxury of a new broad-based subsidy on car trips. For people with disabilities and financial need who may really need affordable on-call car service, the city might collaborate with or create a program like GoGo Grandparent to help means-qualified people access rideshare with or without a cell phone. The city could subsidize local car trips through such a program in a more limited and less fiscally regressive way, only for people who've been vetted through means testing for financial and physical need. As a taxpayer, I object to paying for subsidies for well-heeled residents who can afford Uber and Lyft. Every car and electric car trip to our streets contributes to increased auto congestion, safety risk, greenhouse gas emissions for all road users, because making streets creates greenhouse gas emissions. Building cars does all these things for all road users, including vulnerable foot-powered students on school routes, not necessarily near the schools, but on school routes that this program uses. Link is fiscally unsustainable, creates regressive transfer of budget dollars to people who do not need subsidy. But most importantly, it reinforces that very bad habit of picking up your phone to call a car when you want to make a local trips. I live near the Mountain View border. It takes me 25 easy minutes on a bike ride to get to downtown. I'm 65 years old. We can do this.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any lights from commissioners nor hands raised. So that concludes this item. Thank you very much for coming to give us an update. And then we're going to move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So our main agenda item tonight is a study session on the Palo Alto Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan. It's a draft plan. And Ms. Starlock, will you take it away?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you.
A few words before we get started. I want to introduce this plan and note that we have three main reasons for developing it. The first is money. Cities with a plan like this are eligible for state and federal safety implementation grants. The second reason is our SCAP, our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. On-road transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in town. While electric vehicles are part of the solution to this, active transportation and transit, as you just heard, are the other part of this solution. We know that road safety is the main reason that people don't walk or bike or roll. So a road safety plan is essential to growing active mode shares. And finally, the city's new housing element adds more people to Palo Alto. These new residents will need access and mobility in town. Providing safe roads for walking and biking, as well as transit, will help us move more people on our limited roadway space. With that, I'm going to ask our consultant, Ashley Takushi from Fair and Peers, to begin the presentation. She will be delivering it. And we are looking for your feedback tonight. She has a slide that will share that. We are looking for feedback on a target year date, feedback on the resolution, and then any other feedback you have on the document. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia, and hello, commissioners. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm here to share Palo Alto Safe Streets and Roads for All Safety Action Plan. So here is the agenda for tonight's meeting. You may have already seen some of these slides at previous meetings that we've attended, so I will quickly go over them as a refresher and then spend a bit more time on the slides that I have not presented before. Before we dive into this meeting, I wanted to share a bit about the Safety Action Plan and how it complements but is different from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan update or the BPTP update. Both the Safety Action Plan and BPTP update had a variety of common data inputs. This included using the same crash data sources from the years 2018 through 2022, input from various community engagement events such as Bike Palo Alto in October 2023, an online survey, and the interactive web map, as well as various meetings with an internal stakeholder working group. So now a bit on how these two plans are different. Some key differences include the Safety Action Plan's focus on safety for all modes of travel, while the BPTP update hones in on bicycle and pedestrian collisions. The Safety Action Plan looked at proposed projects from existing plans and reviewed it with a safety lens, while the BPTP is identifying new bike and pedestrian projects. And lastly, the Safety Action Plan is mostly focused on setting up the city to institutionalize a new safety framework through policy and putting safety at the forefront of trade-off decisions, while the BPTP update will build off of this policy framework for project implementation. So looking at it a bit more through a graphic, I wanted to share the relationship with the Safety Action Plan, not only to the BPTP update, but to other plans as well. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the Safety Action Plan sets up the policy foundation for transportation planning. The BPTP that is underway and will be adopted later this year as well identifies the pedestrian and bicycle network and the facility types for implementation. Then upcoming specific or area plans, such as the San Antonio Road Area Plan, will prepare a more detailed land use and transportation design and implementation plan. All right, so going back into a bit of background on the safe system approach. This safe system approach uses the model to improve our transportation system. It describes 5 safe system elements on the inside of the wheel, as well as 6 principles on the outer ring. A fundamental objective of the safe system approach is to eliminate fatal and serious injuries for all road users by accommodating human mistakes and keeping impacts on the human body at tolerable levels. What separates the safe system approach from the traditional approach to safety is the ethical imperative that not even one death is acceptable on our roadway system. The Swiss cheese model helps to demonstrate how the safe system elements work together to make sure that if one part fails, there is a redundant system in place. The holes in the Swiss cheese show weaknesses in the individual parts of the system, but when the slices act as layers or defenses and the holes aren't lined up as shown on the left graphic, a person is likely to be more protected. As I mentioned previously, the safe system approach focuses transportation system design and operation on anticipating human error, proactively managing the transfer of kinetic energy, and sharing responsibility to all who use and maintain the roadway. A newer framework in the transportation space takes a look at safety through the public health lens. The Safe System wheel showed previously uses a mixture of strategies for redundancy as shown by that Swiss cheese graphic. This graphic here tells the public health framework to point to how much of each of these strategies highlighted in the different tiers we want to choose to get the maximum impact and most success. So what exactly does this mean? At the top of the pyramid, an individual level strategy, for example, is posting yard signs to slow down. These have some, but not widespread, deep, and lasting impacts. Meanwhile, a population level strategy at the bottom would be road designers physically separating people driving from people walking and biking wherever possible with fully separated complete streets. Another is slowing speeds wherever possible with traffic calming features on the road and lowering speed limits so that if and when a crash does occur, it's less severe. These population level strategies are what we consider an upstream focus in reaching 0 deaths and fatalities and having far greater and more lasting safety impacts. Sometimes people think that we can educate and enforce unwanted behavior and encourage people to do the right thing on our roadways. By focusing on the base of the pyramid, we are also centering equity, so all ages, all abilities, modes, backgrounds, and income levels, and infusing that work that, for example, the Safe Routes to School team is doing, and that is at the fundamental base of the pyramid. Now that I've gone through the safety framework of this plan, I'll share a bit about what this plan includes. As Sylvia mentioned, this plan is funded through the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, and the plan must include these 9 elements to be compliant for the future SS4A funding. And all 9 of these components will be met with this plan. Wanted to share the high injury network. A high injury network, or HIN, refers to a map that identifies specific streets within the city where a disproportionately high number of traffic fatalities and serious injuries occur, allowing us to understand areas to focus on to reduce traffic-related injuries and deaths. It is based on the crash data that I mentioned previously from Switters from 2018 through 2022. The high injury network is shown, and KSIs, or killed in severe injury collisions, are highlighted in red, and other injury collisions in blue. 63% of collisions that occur within the city during that time frame occurred on 4% of Palo Alto streets. Now looking a bit into community engagement. As I mentioned previously, throughout the course of this project, we had various outlets to collect community feedback. We had an online survey with an interactive web map, 2 in-person events, and various virtual meetings with an internal stakeholder working group and with the various committees and council. Key themes from the community feedback included a general enthusiasm for bike lanes, concerns around speeding motorists, the need for enhanced intersection treatments, more bike lanes along school routes, and additional connections to key destinations. Now to talk about the city's 7 safety focus areas. The 7 safety focus areas, again, use the collision data from 2018 through 2022 and are included in the plan to show areas where things like exposure, likelihood, and severity risk are higher throughout the city. This slide shows a quick summary of the seven safety focus areas included in the plan. We also looked at this plan through an equity lens. Many agencies use a federal or regional database that focuses on equity communities. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, measures equity using income, race, English proficiency, age, disability, and car ownership to develop equity priority communities, or EPCs, or designated census tracts with a significant concentration of underserved populations. MTC has not identified any EPCs in Palo Alto, so this plan uses other equity considerations and definitions. The figure here shows the population by census blocks that has a household income below the federal poverty line. Generally, the number of people throughout the city that live below the poverty line is very low. There are some census blocks where between 10 to 20% of the population lives below the poverty line. These are located near downtown, the Alma Street and East Meadow Drive, Charleston Road area, near Stanford, and in the southeast corner of the city near Foothill Expressway. While Palo Alto does not have designated EPC areas, adjacent communities that include parts of Stanford and East Palo Alto are EPC geographies. To best serve those accessing and using city streets, this plan considers roadways that serve as connections to the city from these EPC geographies. This includes the city's suggested walk and roll routes for students who reside in East Palo Alto and commute to school in Palo Alto. Transit also serves as the main mode of transportation for households where members are unable to drive, or maybe one member of the family needs to use the car to get to work or school, and others in the household need to use transit. This figure shows the major transit corridors in Palo Alto, where bus stops and connections to and from key destinations should be prioritized for first and last mile connections or access considerations to center these equity concerns. Oops, sorry. Now looking at safety as a public health concern. I wanted to take some time to elaborate a bit more on the public health impact pyramid that I shared earlier and explain how this is infused into the plan. Much of the top of the pyramid is incorporated in the project list or awareness measures to remind the community to be safety stewards. Along with infrastructure-based recommendations, the plan highlights the importance of looking at the high entry network and housing plans together. This includes first and last mile access to transit and safety along El Camino Real and San Antonio that will need to be a focus in tandem with the jobs and housing balance and improved transit. This is also in alignment with the city's Safe Routes to School program and the comprehensive economic development strategy to improve accessibility by embracing walking and biking to, from, and within all of the city's commercial districts and addressing parking policies and systems. By recognizing and rectifying these gaps in the roadway network, the city creates opportunities for residents to have closer access to employment, education, and medical-related institutions, for example. In areas where housing is being planned, the city will prioritize implementation of continuous and comfortable pedestrian and bicycle facilities, which may require the reallocation of space within the existing roadway or the removal of parking. We also wanted to highlight how this public health impact pyramid is already in action in the city, and that is through the Safe Routes to School program. This list is definitely not comprehensive, but we wanted to give a few examples of how the city's Safe Routes to School program aligns with the various tiers of the pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, the program provides children with tools needed to get to school by walking or biking. Rose, who's the Safe Routes to School coordinator for the city, shared with me that in the past 30 years, the Safe Routes to School program has about tripled the number of students who walk and bike to school, and that's something that the city should be proud of. By creating tools like the walk and roll routes, students are able to understand how they can take designated routes to and from their home and school. At the built environment level, the city has a 20-mile-per-hour posted speed limit in school zones, and the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan update that is currently ongoing is preparing an updated project list to implement more bike and pedestrian related projects throughout the city. At the next tier, latent measures, the city regularly reviews their signal equipment to upgrade the timings to accommodate bikes and pedestrians when needed. They've included all pedestrian phases and leading pedestrian intervals, or LPIs, to give pedestrians and bikes a head start when crossing. At the active measure tier, the city hosts annual bike rodeos, distributes bike helmets, and has an extensive list of core education programs that can be found on the city's Safe Routes to School website. Lastly, having signage like "Drive Like Your Kids Live Here" and child safety alert figurines are examples of awareness measures that people have in their yards to remind people to slow down. Reaching 0 deaths and serious injuries. Within the next 5 years, the safety will institutionalize safety throughout the city through updates of existing policies, programs, and projects. This will really set the framework for staff to shift their focus to be more proactive and systemic, and trade-off decisions in the project prioritization and design will reflect a commitment to reducing safety risk factors in our transportation system. So what do we want to hear back from you today? In the plan, you may have seen 2 years highlighted, whether it be 2035 or 2040. We would love to hear your feedback on what you think our goal or zero goal for 0 deaths and fatalities should be, because that's what council wants to hear. We also would like feedback on the resolution that's included at the front of the plan, because that will, when adopted, that will really help city staff push into action these bike and pedestrian and other safety related projects. And we're also here to take questions today or listen to any comments that you have during your review of the plan. I wanted to hand it back over to Sylvia if you wanted to say anything else about requesting feedback from the commissioners.
Thanks, Ashley. I think you got it. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. So any clarifying questions from commissioners before we go to public comment? I don't even see any hands raised and nobody's here, so we may not, we have one public comment that's come up. Commissioner or Vice Chair Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick ones. We talked about this a little bit in pre-meeting, but for the benefit of the other commissioners, does the definition of serious injury include concussions?
Yes, I can answer that. So we use the definitions from the Switter's Handbook of what a killed or severe injury collision is. A concussion does not count as a KSI if a victim is able to walk away on their own.
Can I just follow on that question? So in the draft plan, there was something that said that a KSI can include a broken bone, severe lacerations. And so my question is, if there is a broken bone, again, is that automatically considered a KSI? Or is it, if they can walk away, then it's not considered a KSI? In the case of broken bones or severe lacerations or any of the other things that were listed.
It is definitely dependent on how the police officer reports the collision. Typically, if there is a broken bone or laceration and a victim will need to go to the hospital, that is by default typically noted as a severe injury.
To the hospital or urgent care? Specifically hospital, emergency room.
I'm not sure, but we can get back to you on that specific definition. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't believe there's any distinction as to whether it's an urgent care based on my report reading. It's to medical services.
So medical services broadly. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yep. Two more. All these should be quick. It looks to me like the number of accidents along Alma is certainly comparable, if not greater than the number of accidents along Middlefield. And yet most of Alma is not in the high injury network. Could you speak to why you chose not to include it?
Let me pull up the high injury network. So yes, there's definitely a high concentration of injury collisions along Alma. But as we look at Middlefield, there are a few more KSI collisions. So that had a higher weight than having the collisions on Alma. Not to say that it's not an important corridor that we should focus on. But oh, sorry, I realized I'm not sharing my screen. But that is why all of Alma is not included on the high injury network. There is portions though, more in the downtown area.
Right. So there's a judgment call as to the subdivisions of each of these routes that meet the criteria for membership in the high injury network.
Correct.
Okay. And the last one's rather technical. In several places, we refer to VMT reduction as a safety strategy. And I'm curious about whether that refers to VMT as measured exclusively within the city limits, or whether that includes VMT from potentially very distant places.
This should be VMT looked at locally as well as regionally. You could say that a lot of people may need to commute into Palo Alto from further distances to go to Stanford, a research center, for example. With the city's housing element and including more housing, for instance, on the San Antonio corridor, and having more pedestrian and bike friendly facilities, those are the things at the base of the pyramid that would reduce VMT. So it's looking at both local and regional VMT reductions.
Okay, thank you. When thinking about the problem, I found it useful to treat those things separately. So I hope that awareness is there. Thank you. That's all I have.
I don't see any other hands, commissioner hands, lights for clarifying questions. So let's move to public comment now.
Yes, I have two raised hands on Zoom. First is from Art L.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Art Liberman. I'm a member of Payback. I'm speaking only as an individual on personally. And I spoke at the January 7th Payback meeting. And what I said was that the idea of eliminating serious accidents on the roadways is really too ambitious for just this being a project of one city, Palo Alto government, the Office of Transportation. If the city of Palo Alto is serious about reducing KSI to zero, the plan must be a joint plan of multiple departments representing the policy of the city of Palo Alto government. It must bind at least several departments, each committing to its goals through their programs, their manpower, and their budgets. These departments should include the Office of Transportation, Public Works, which is responsible for road design, road changes, and road signage, and building only what are now considered safe roads needs to be in their plans, including learning how to effectively reduce vehicle speed on roadways. And the third department that I felt should be included in here as a founding member of this program should be the Palo Alto Police Department, because they are responsible for the enforcement of the laws. As we know, just stating the laws is insufficient. Laws must be enforced. A proposal to eliminate KSI must include a commitment by the Palo Alto Police Department to enforce speed laws and other motor vehicle laws. Several Payback members at the January 7th meeting made a case that the Planning and Community Development Department should also be part of this proposal, since the land use decisions affect traffic and parking. I should also say that the updated projects and policy list, especially ones that would relax the prohibition on street closures, is important. I would hope that the timescale and priority of each project that's listed in the Appendix H and page 59 should be added, because some, for example, the rail crossings are very long-term projects. And this list, though, sounds to me like those expected from the BPTP update. If I were a city council person, I would consider delaying this proposal until after the BPTP update comes along, becomes public. Finally, an important aspect of this proposal is to communicate the rationale and policies to the public. However, for me, the proposal text includes too much of FHWA safe system buzzwords and too little on specific proposed changes to roadways. I fear that it will not attract the attention of most members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is from Penny Elson.
I should be pretty quick. Thank you. Penny Elson again. A key concern I have about the Safe System Action Plan is the low priority it appears to put on education and encouragement, which are essential parts of a redundant traffic safety system. I mean, I agree that all these engineering improvements are wonderful, but we've learned in Palo Alto that if you don't teach a kid what that signal means that you put up, if you don't teach them to be on the correct side of the road, if you don't teach them to look left, right, and left again, they're not going to know to do those things, and they're not going to be able to use these facilities. There's just so much. Imperfect engineers can design a perfect system. There's just so much they can do to do that. It's critically important that kids know how to use those systems correctly. And I'm very bothered by that pyramid graphic. I've said this to staff before, and I'm also bothered by what seems to me to be almost hostile language in some parts of the plan toward education. And I really hope we're not going to see that reflected in the final draft of it. I'd like staff to confirm that that findings from the San Antonio area plan will be integrated into this action plan, so that those projects can qualify for, I had a conversation with Sylvia Starlack this morning, and I think I understand that it will. I want to know that San Antonio improvements that conform with, state-of-the-art improvements are going to happen on San Antonio Road and actually be integrated citywide into the BPTP. And for the moment, those are my comments. I would like to hear from PTC members whether or not you received the full set of comments that I sent to staff.
We did receive them.
Thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, then let's bring it back to the commission.
Sorry, there's one more raised hand.
Okay, let's take that.
From David Cole.
Yep.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is David Cole, team member for Bike Palo Alto. And I would encourage you to please accept the earliest date possible to implement these safety measures. I cannot emphasize that enough. No reason to delay on having safe streets for all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that concludes the public comments, and we're going to bring it back to the commission. First up, Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for bringing this back to us. It's that the first time you brought it to us, it made an impact on me, and I've, as you might have noticed, I've been pestering transportation staff about data for the last few months related to the Safe Streets program. So it's really exciting to see this first draft, 173 pages, as we start to mold this. So I'm excited to get started. I'm going to start with a couple of questions. So, one of the issues you'd like some feedback on tonight is our target date, which when this first came to us was 2030, which apparently was too ambitious because this is a extraordinarily large task that, as one of our public speakers mentioned, really will cut across all of our departmental disciplines here in the city, or many of them. And I think that's recognized by city staff. But so now we're looking at should we be targeting 2035 or 2040? And I guess the question I had is there a risk of losing grant funding or some other penalty of picking a deadline and then not hitting it?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay, then as we up here on the commission ponder which date to pick, I mean, a natural inclination would be, well, sooner's better, right? But if it were that simple, I don't think staff would be presenting us with a choice. So what are some of the things that we should be thinking about to try to set a realistic goal as we sit up here and maybe give you some feedback by the end of the item?
So, resource availability, staffing availability, Lily may want to add to this. And at the same time, a sense of urgency, what is the sense of urgency you want to convey? Your recommendation will convey a sense of urgency to the council. Just for your information, I think Caltrans has set their own date for zero as 2050. So just as context there, those are the kinds of things that I think you would want to include. I don't know, Lily, if you want to add anything.
Okay, all right, well, that's helpful. I guess as I think about this, 2035 is a decade from now, which seems like a long time, but what we're talking about here is not just the time it'll take to create a plan that could achieve zero KSI, it's actually to implement it. And so we're talking about changes to roadways. We're not only, first of all, developing the plans and then implementing them over a course of years with development happening in that context. And so I guess I want to be realistic and set a target that feels more achievable, more realistically achievable. So I think given that guidance from staff, I'd be inclined to lean toward the 2040 and be interested in hearing what other commissioners have to say on that topic. I do think that one of the clarifying questions that was asked earlier, moving topics now, what is the definition of a significant injury? It's kind of fascinating because this isn't a Palo Alto program, right? This is not even a state, it's nationwide. This is a comprehensive nationwide program. And I'm curious as to how we'll all be operating under the same definition, right? I mean, a fatality is obvious. But what's a significant injury? And this is, I'm not the first to think of this. And so I expect over time, as various jurisdictions start to grapple with this, there will be a uniform definition that arises and needs to be implemented so that we can have a uniform metric of success throughout the US. Let's see. I'm curious about the timeline for data collection. All right, and this goes back to this, request I've had throughout the fall for we're getting monthly police reports. Can we get another column that tells us whether it was a fatality or a significant injury? And we haven't been able to get that yet. And there was an explanation a few meetings ago at a meeting I wasn't at, but reviewed the minutes as to the challenges there. But as we go forward with a goal, once we adopt this plan and we're moving forward with the goal, we have to have some measure, some metric that can be accomplished in a reasonable time. And so, for example, when I look on page 31 of the draft plan, and I see that the 2022 data is still preliminary, right? More than 2 complete calendar years after the last fatality or significant injury could have occurred in 2022. I don't really understand. And so but it concerns me as we are rolling this out and trying to measure, are we always going to be 2+ years behind? And why would that need to be? Because if I'm in an auto accident tonight going home and I die, that'll be a part of a police report by tomorrow. And within a week, that's going to be entered into a database. And probably the same is going to be true if I'm only significantly injured tonight. And so I don't understand how it can take more than a few keystrokes in that process to have all the data a few days after the first of the year for the prior year. But clearly that's not so. And so maybe help us understand the data collection for this so that, again, our expectations are reasonable going forward.
I can take that question. So for this plan and other safety plans that I worked on as well, we use this SWITRS database that takes injury collisions and UC Berkeley SafeTrack geocodes them. So it puts it in a GIS database so we can see exactly where those collisions are located. That is why there's such a lag. SafeTrack only has a certain number of staff as well as budget to input all of these collisions that they get, as the whole state. And so that's why we are looking at data that is a couple of years old. But also we want to keep in mind that this safety plan should be updated regularly, whether that, is 3 years or 5 years. That's kind of for the city to decide and for community input as well. But, it's a snapshot in time to look at the collision history that has occurred. Then we can proactively look at locations where, these same risk factors like the roadway context or, near land use, where a collision is more likely to happen. And so that is how we use past data to kind of look proactively at coming up with recommendations to make the roadway safer so that injuries don't occur, or when they do occur, they do not result in a killed or severe injury.
Thanks for that, Ashley. I just want to add to that answer. I'm not sure if you saw in the draft plan, there was an item for a rapid response team that would deploy soon after a collision to look at what could be done at that location and at other locations citywide, so those collisions would not occur. So regardless of whether or not you're seeing it in your PTC packet, if we're able to get this plan through and set up a rapid response team, we would be taking action.
Okay.
And one more insight to why data, or it takes that long for data. Just from my experience of working with a large police department in San Jose, fatalities and severe injury to maybe this close to fatality, that data is available the next day. And we can track that. We can track that day by day internally. And we're not talking about 1,000 points. It's very few.
Mm-hmm.
That data we will have in almost real time. But anything less than that, less severe injuries, it really relies on somebody to report it. And then if they don't, and even if they report it, is the data clear enough and consistent enough to enter in the either statewide system or countywide system? There's questions as to the accuracy of the data and such.
Can I interject really quickly here, because we also talked about this in pre-meeting a little bit. So Ms. Starlock, you had mentioned that if there's a serious accident, you know about it immediately. So what I'm wondering about is, in conjunction with those payback incident reports that we receive, is it possible to know? Like, is it possible for us to receive that information, since staff knows about it, even if it's not connected to the specific data point, to be able to say this month, none happened, 1 happened, 2 happened, because we know about it?
I think we need to have this conversation with PD, because I might know something, but I might not be able to say, because PD maybe hasn't finished the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Someone might be in a hospital. Like I can't really say.
Right, and we'll know the location. It's a dot on a map. And this plan is geo-coded. Right, we're looking at a quarter and not necessarily 1 point.
Well, I guess what we're both saying is that we want that information. So even if you know about, it's in the paper. So even if you're not allowed to say anything, it's kind of public information. So we don't need the specifics, what the injury was. We don't even need necessarily to know where it is, if there's some privacy concern, but just to know what happened. And that in and of itself would be valuable.
Yeah, and PD puts out press releases, when there are fatalities that they can report. So
I guess how I'd like to wrap, my part on this particular point is, and I'm sorry, but I didn't study the draft plan well enough to know how kind of you addressed this issue of reporting out. But that is something I think up here on the PTC we're interested in. And so as you massage the draft plan, if there's an opportunity to talk about, reporting out, given some of the limitations on data release that we've already heard tonight, I think that would be useful. Again, to sort of set expectations, in the plan that will ultimately be adopted. All right. Let's see. I did want to mention that I did see the payback comment letter that Ms. Ellison asked about. So I think it was distributed to the commissioners today at 12:30. Candidly, it's long and very detailed, and I appreciate the work that Payback did on that, but I didn't have time to digest it, and it came into this morning at 9, so I expect that staff didn't have time to digest it either. But I appreciate, our or the other organizations really doing the deep dive, and I'm sure that staff is going to look at those comments and take them into consideration. So I just wanted that group to know that they were, definitely heard and appreciated. And then one other thing on your bullet list of things you'd like input on, and that's the resolution, which is on page 3 of the draft report. I looked at the resolution. There's really not much to comment on. I think the first 5 provisions are just kind of statement of facts. And then there's a couple things saying the law requires this, and then we do it in the resolution. So I've given my input that I thought 2040 is the right number for that, but I'm otherwise supportive of the resolution as my input on that.
Thank you. I'm having light confusion here. So is it Commissioner Templeton? Did you? Okay, so Commissioner Templeton, then Suma.
Thank you. I'm just doing a little thought exercise on some points that Commissioner Heckman brought up about what the implications of 2035 versus 2040 are. And I started thinking through, what does that mean to our transportation team? We have input on, but council sets priorities. So that's not going to be it. And what are we rooting for if we root for 2035 versus 2040? And I started thinking, I assume, but maybe it's worth validating, that any project that our transportation team is a part of is working towards 0 fatalities and KSIs already. So what changes? What does this mean? What are you actually asking for input on?
I think the biggest change is the focus that we would create resources for. Today, my experience, the 4th week on the job, I'm seeing a lot of our work is reactive in nature. And having this plan would be committing us to a path, a direction, and a budget, resources to get us there. If you said 2035, 10 years from now, we would be thinking about how do we get us there in 2025? How much money will we need? How many teams do we need? That calculation.
Okay, I'm going to turn this back to you then.
Sure.
How many KSIs do you think is an acceptable amount?
0.
Okay.
So
in other words, this is not really, you're not actually seeking input from us on that. And we also agree, we don't want anybody to die or get seriously injured in our city.
Right.
Okay. I think you're going to find unanimous support for that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I think the kind of okay, you're asking what is the difference this will make, right? Right now, we have city policies that don't necessarily prioritize safety on our roads. There are conflicting policies. We have policies that say adding delay to our roads is not okay. What if we have a safety project that adds delay to our roads? What does council
like slowing
do?
down the timing for crossing El Camino for gun students, for example.
Exactly.
Right.
So this provides a safety framework for the council, a policy framework for the council to make these decisions as noted in the resolution.
Right. But I'm gonna keep pushing because I think we're all in agreement here, but we need to make it really clear to show our support when you go to council. That doesn't take 5 years. Cleaning up the policy discrepancies is not something that takes 5 years of work to implement. Right? This is something you could do. You have a list of them, you get them cleaned up. You get them cleaned up on a regular basis when you work with council. So is that not happening? Is that something that you would like our support on? Because I don't think we're seeing a lot of those. Those are not coming to us to recommend to council on your behalf. So how can we help?
Focus on trade-offs.
Right. So the trade-offs, there are this
plan will help, I think, will help council make trade-offs around when there are safety projects, right? We might have to reconfigure parking. We might have to remove parking. We might
are
have
the trade-offs lives?
Potentially.
And I hate to put you on the spot, but that's what you're asking us to decide here. There's no decision between 5 more years of deaths, right? Like if that's what's in front of us, we need to understand that before we vote.
I think there's trade-off and there's reality of how much we can do in time.
How do we know that? We're looking to
sorry?
you guys to tell us that.
Yes.
About timing. So what input do you need from us about timing? We're going to tell you, we don't want any more deaths starting tomorrow. We're not waiting to 2035.
And
But
we would,
can't be done because
Understood.
you know things we don't know. So what is it that you want us to know to help decide between 2035 and 2040?
It starts with the policy changes, commitment, resources, culture change across the organization, and a lot of education awareness in the community too. One of the objectives here is that we all take responsibility for our safety. It's not just the city, it's not just the pedestrian or the motorist. All of us have to take a part in this role. So there's a lot of the cultural changes, even if policy was in place, enforcement of the policy.
I'm gonna throw a curveball here and let you know what my suggestion, if that's what you want, if you're looking for the people of Palo Alto to get on board with the programs outlined in this document, I would love to see the transportation department engage more frequently with this body to publicly discuss those changes that we're proposing. Because honestly, that's not been happening. We have had a dramatic dearth of conversations around transportation and safety. We all want it, and we haven't gotten it. So if you want us to champion the changes, that starts with a conversation with the public and our ability to digest that, reflect it back in a way, have the conversations in our neighborhood, and give us a channel through which we can discuss it with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
And if I may, Commissioner Templeton, just to provide a little bit of an additional response to your earlier questions. I think that the transportation staff has provided guidance, right? They didn't suggest that this would be a 5-year plan. Right? That these kinds of improvements will take time. And so they gave a couple of options, 10 years, 15 years. But with a recognition that there will likely be inconveniences created by this effort to make our roads safer. We had an example of a discussion this morning of a change to a roadway that was intended to make an intersection safer or work better for one purpose, and it made it inconvenient added inconvenience for a local resident. And so that is something we've seen in the past, and that is a part of these discussions, as well as the impacts to resources, et cetera, that were already mentioned. And so having that conversation, that there are options about how fast we try to move on something like this, and getting your support on that is very helpful to this discussion and moving it
I
forward.
totally agree with that. However, I will reflect back. What I'm hearing is nobody here says that they want to tolerate 5 more deaths for any reason, 5 more years of deaths for any reason. So that may be true, and it may be difficult to implement things and ask the public to change, but that's not how it's being presented. It's being presented, PTC chooses 5 more years of road fatalities to convenience the public. That's the headline, right? So that is not an acceptable way for us to frame our work, and it's not an acceptable way for us to support your work, right? Nor is it acceptable to the public, who what they really need, and the reason you're not getting the buy-in is the engagement. If we don't listen, and we don't have a way of listening and discussing it, you know, you can have all the neighborhood meetings you want, but people are not going to buy in until we're engaging in a formal way. And so that's what we want to offer. We're here because we're the Planning and Transportation Commission. We love this work. We love making our community better. And housing is part of it, but transportation is another part of it. Right? And it's so important to us, and we want to hear more from you. We want to engage you, and we want to help you figure out how to get buy-in.
Right, and just to respond to that, this plan states outright directly that PTC is part of the quote unquote task force for the enforcement and monitoring of this document. So I have brought the thing to you that you want.
And I want to acknowledge that, but it can't be the end of it, because you have brought us things sparingly in the past, and not for any nefarious reason. I think it's you busy. But we do want to see more engagement. This is an excellent start. But as you can see, in the lack of engagement you're getting tonight, there's more we can do. And if this becomes a regular part of our conversation, we'll have more opportunity to engage people.
Right. And I have that same goal.
Awesome.
Well, I'm just going to interject here. We would love, you know, when the new director is hired, we would love to see them regularly here, because poor Mr. Rios just, you know, doesn't have the 20,000 foot view because he's busy doing his job. So he's just not able to answer a lot of our questions a lot of the time. And so we would like to engage more with the department. And Ms. As acting director, Lou, if you're able to come, we appreciate it, even if you're only able to pop on at the, you know, staff reports and for 5 minutes at the beginning. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So now we have Commissioner Suma, then Aiken.
Thank you. And thank you to our new acting director for coming and helping the city and for being here tonight. So we're mostly talking, I guess, at this point about the dates. And I would like to say that I think that I was very inspired. You probably all know the famous story about Hoboken, New Jersey. They had one, you know it, and I've talked about it before here, but they made a commitment because of one pedestrian vehicular fatality. The new mayor in 2019 made a commitment, and they had their goal was 2030, so basically a decade. I have a strong preference for a decade. That being said, it doesn't mean we're going to wait for a decade to pass before we start making these improvements. It's just to acknowledge that some of these improvements are really going to take a long time and going to be hard, because our streets are already laid out the way they are, and there's, with very few exceptions, it's hard to accommodate all the needs in a safe manner. And we saw this on El Camino. So I think a decade is long enough for Palo Alto. If Hoboken can do it, and they haven't had a fatality in 7 years, a traffic, pedestrian or bike fatality. If they can do it, I'm sure Palo Alto with our fantastic staff and the way we work with all our various groups, we can get it done. So I think that's a realistic goal. I really want to thank the members of the community, especially Penny Elson. I'll call her out by name. And I don't know when staff got the information from her, and I know she's been involved all along, and that staff has probably been listening to her. But it really was like responding to her long analysis would have taken a week, to go through all of it. But I did try to look at a lot of it. And I want to thank members of the public, the very few that spoke. And I am surprised. I thought there would be more public speakers at this. And that is troubling to me because this is a big deal. And so I think 2035 is absolutely imperative that we have just a decade to finish this, knowing that it's going to be ongoing the whole time. And to have zero tolerance and to work towards zero tolerance. But I'm worried that more people haven't gotten involved, but very thankful of the speakers we did have tonight. And I think that the other things you would be, I will say at a very high, so 2035, yes, a decade, we can beat Hoboken by 1 year. But, yeah, but, that being said, I found the report a little troubling, and I think some members of the public mentioned this. It's a very fluffy, if that means anything, jargony report, and the most concrete thing, is at the end. It's attachments G, or appendices or attachments G and H, which have all the projects and stuff. And I think to make a report that will be embraced by the community, I think you need to put those things front and center and get rid of some of the jargony language. It was too much so for me. And I also, to be honest, I'm sure that staff knows how to include all the things, and our consultant, that we need to do to get this to the point where it will be accepted by the agencies that we want to look for grants from. So I trust you there, but it was not what I would call a very informative read in many parts of it. And I agree with the concern about not prioritizing education. I felt like the report in general relied on basic principles that exist in traffic engineering and safety, but wasn't very specific to Palo Alto. And I think that we have, Palo Alto has a history of being very engaged in encouraging bicycle and pedestrian and getting people out of cars, and a lot of experience with that. And I sort of felt like that was missing. It didn't feel personalized to Palo Alto. So as to the resolution, which I think is on packet page 3, the report page 3, I think that's also something that staff knows they need to do, so it will be an acceptable document for various agencies. So I think that's fine. And as trade-offs, I think it was number 8 that was trade-offs we'd have to make for safety. I think people will have different individual responses to those. I think one thing that's really missing in Palo Alto, and I've said this a lot of times, is there's virtually no police presence on the street handing out tickets. You could hand out many tickets every day at intersection I use every day, El Camino, Cambridge, and California Avenue. I am nearly killed there by red stop light running on pedestrian and in cars. It happened again today on my way here. It's absurdly ridiculous. I would really like to have the cameras that they have in San Francisco have been wildly successful. I was a little confused about what was legal in California and what was just made legal for certain cities. But if you read about those in San Francisco, they've had a great success in identifying people who run red lights, and also quite a revenue producer, I noticed. And running red lights has become really scary to me. I mean, I specifically live in my neighborhood, so I would be walkable to Cal Ave downtown. And I am now afraid to walk across El Camino because it is so frequent a problem. I don't know if it's timing, and El Camino is a problem because our safety standards based, there's a chart in this report on that too. It's based on the actual posted speed on El Camino, which is not the actual speed of drivers on El Camino. So I would say that we need to take that into consideration. So as to trade-offs, I think some will be acceptable and some will not be acceptable. If we could get everybody to slow down by having fewer lanes, I know this is going to make people mad, but I wouldn't necessarily be against it because it's becoming really unsafe. And I would say that red light running is one of the scariest things that people do. People are already using the brakes along El Camino that are where the bus has to dive in and out once we have the bus and shared bike lane. They're already using those as right turn lanes. Like there's going to be a learning curve problem. And we know that those right hook or whatever they're called, accidents are the worst for bikes and pedestrians. So we have to also when we talk about trade-offs, I want to make sure that they are really worth it and that they work, that they just don't sound good on paper. We've seen some projects that haven't come to fruition in the way that they are real improvements. They feel kind of sideways or they look nice on paper, but they're not so good. So those would be my high level comments. And I would like to get more police action on the streets right away. And I think that's something that council would need to do in a council meeting, to have a conversation with the city manager. I just don't see them ever waiting to ticket people or stopping people once in a while, but hardly ever. So I think that's a first step and just kind of general ideas, high level. Thanks.
Commissioner Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll start
again.
I think I'll start with the high level issues as well. What I'm hearing as we discuss the target date is probably that we're posing the problem in the wrong way. And I think about, suppose we have 2034 as a year with 0 KSIs. Are we done? And the answer, of course, is no. This is an ongoing process. We can have any number of years in a row with 0 KSIs, and we're still not done. So there is no conclusion date. There is only a set of things that we believe need to be done as quickly as we can manage to get them done. And so if you must set a date, the way to think about it is as a forcing function. So this is how you impose urgency on council, and in particular, with respect to budget, right? So if you must, then that pushes me towards the earlier date. Although, as I said, I'm not sure that's meaningful, so you may be challenged on that. Let me talk about a practical case in which that applies, which will lead to a comment about the resolution. I believe everyone who hears about this is going to applaud the emphasis on speed management, because we all know that this is a real issue. But pursuing it leads to some interesting consequences. For example, if you succeed in pushing the speeds on the residential arterials down to 25 miles an hour, you have just created a huge incentive for the traffic to move off onto the collectors in the local streets, which are also 25 miles per hour, and have fewer physical impairments to travel. We don't want to wait for KSIs to start showing up on those other streets before we take action there. We want to be proactive. And I think what that means is we have to do what the comp plan asks us to do and proactively monitor vehicle and bike and pedestrian traffic across much wider areas than the high injury network. Now, there's going to be a challenge in choosing what that area is, but I suspect the right answer is going to be sampling around the high injury network to start. This is something council needs to understand, and I think it would be good to make that understanding explicit. So I suggest that perhaps in recital 8 of the resolution, you make it clear that this is an ongoing effort. It requires ongoing, at least budget for the programs that we will need to do that monitoring and eventually expand our focus areas for mitigation. So that's what I would add to the resolution, is a sense that this is ongoing. I think the final big picture point I wanted to make also touches on the trade-offs discussion. Just because safety becomes the highest priority doesn't mean that other goals are completely ignored. And I agree with Ms. Elson that some of the commentary in the report might lead you to believe that other goals have completely fallen by the wayside. You could reassure people and improve public acceptance, I believe, by expressing that those other goals are not lost. And I noticed on page 159, there's a bit of language used to discuss the impact review updates that I thought was the right kind of language to use. So perhaps as a model, that might be a start. All right, that's all the high level things I have. I'll let other people talk and then I can cover some more detailed stuff later if you need it.
Okay, great. I will take my turn now. So first I'll comment on the date. I'd like to echo pretty much everything that Commissioners Suma and Vice Chair Aiken said, which is that I'd like to accept the Hoboken Challenge, as Commissioner Templeton has dubbed it. And I think that 2035, 10 years is good because this is aspirational and possibly, and very aspirational, as one of our public commenters mentioned. And so really, this is a forcing function in terms of budget. And if we were to come up with a plan such that everything here would be done in 15 years, that means that City Council wouldn't have as large a fire lighted under their seats as if we say 10 years from now. So that's what I would do. But I also think that Commissioner Aiken's or Vice Chair Aiken's way of looking at this as our goal is 0 fatalities and serious injuries immediately. And our goal is to do everything in the plan in 10 years. So I think that, I don't know what's required from a grant funding perspective, but I wonder if that makes it clear that we're not doing anything and we're not viewing KSI's not even one as acceptable, but there's also only so much that we can do. And that may be the way to think about it, and also will help us prioritize. So that would be my 2 cents on that. In terms of my overall feedback, I'd split it into 3 levels. There's the biggest picture feedback, there's some next level stuff, and then there's some kind of more specific details. On the biggest picture, I think that we need to be clear about the KSI definition, because as we communicate to the public, what's a serious injury? Like if my child had a concussion or my child had a broken arm and they're still able to get up and walk, and that they went to urgent care and the next day and not immediately from the accident scene, that's still a serious injury to me. Now, if that's not being classified as a serious injury, we've got to somehow make that clear, because I don't really know how to tell any member of the public, gee, that concussion wasn't high enough of a priority for us to follow whatever process that we would follow. I was Googling what other cities did, and Seattle, I believe it was, said something about anything more than kind of anything that's not described as cuts and bruises. So that's the opposite extreme. Then also, there's something that Commissioner Suma said sort of about how the most important or action-oriented pieces of the plan are at the end. And so I think we need to communicate urgency. So if we look at the, I think it's page 10 or thereabouts. Let's see. Page 9. So key policy and program changes. A lot of these things are about making more plans, and yet there are key policies listed, I think on pages 58 and 59. Those are the things that we get for signing off on this plan. And to the extent that we can move those up kind of into the more of the executive summary territory, I think that that would be really valuable. And then similarly, there's this, this is an ambitious plan. And so one of the key things, this actually is a question for staff. How much has this been circulated within different city departments? In other words, has PD seen this? Okay, so I'm getting nods from.
Yeah, in the presentation that Ashley gave, she mentioned an internal working group, internal stakeholder working group. That was all staff. We've given it to them. We've met a few times.
And has each working group then reported out to their department? Because I think that's it doesn't end at the working group. It needs to be lived and breathed. So I think that there's a piece of this that, I don't know if it's our city council and then to the city manager to say that this is really a priority and it really will require concerted and coordinated effort. So, and then there's a piece of this that when I look at, this is sort of the tone of the plan, it doesn't feel action oriented enough to me, in that it's not as that specific to Palo Alto. But if you look at the pyramid image that Ms. Takushi had showed us, it talks about sort of engineering roads properly. Absolutely. We should not do that. At the same time, Palo Alto is a built environment already. And so the reality is that engineering roads properly, well, that was already done. They were engineered properly or improperly 70 years ago, 50 years ago, and now we have them. And it's really expensive to start over. So what's missing in this is sort of the trade-off, at the big picture level, sort of the trade-off between, so many of our projects often have sort of a near-term, long-term type classification, as well as a dollar sign classification or ease of implementation piece. And those things at the bottom of the pyramid, many times in a built environment, are the hardest thing and most expensive thing to implement. And so while that certainly makes sense, the reality is that we are also budget limited. If there were unlimited funds, then it would be a different question. So somehow in all of this, it reads more like a laundry list rather than a prioritization. So that kind of takes me into the second level of my feedback, which is around the practicality and the trade-offs. And I think I covered most of it already. And then finally, on the details, I read, or I at least skimmed a lot of Ms. Olson's comments, and I really think that a lot of them are spot on. For example, San Antonio really should be included as the part of the high injury network if that is something that we are going to be using for prioritization purposes, because we're supposed to be proactive, right? Similarly, like we talked about, we've talked recently about making nodes on El Camino here, retail nodes on El Camino in the PTC. We've talked about special setbacks in the PTC. And because we have individual planners seeing projects that might not be, and they might not have yet taken the Hoboken Challenge and signed off onto this plan, like we're making those trade-offs. I remember Director Late actually said, well, there's no bike path planned for Middlefield, so we don't need to worry about the special setback. And I would disagree, because if we're really thinking about safe streets for all, whether it is for a wider sidewalk, whether it is for a separated bike lane, whether it is for a pedestrian island, a wider pedestrian island, we need to be thinking about those things, and we should be treating some of these things in a sacred way. And the plan needs things that will sort of be guidelines for the other departments in terms of what does that mean in your operations? What would you do then if a developer comes and says, well, I want to go into the special setback, and you say, well, no, that's sacred. We're not going to be doing that. So that's kind of at the detailed level. And then we spoke about this beforehand, but I love those quick build, rapid response team ideas, because they are things that we can do in a built environment that would show that we're not just going to sit and plan for the next 5 years, but we're going to try and do things. And if we really want to do those things, if that is really critical to our success, then we need to put that front and center so that City Council funds those things. All right, that's it. Commissioner Templeton. And then Commissioner Heckman.
Thanks. I have to leave early, so I wanted to just chime in because I wasn't included in your list of people you agree with, but I said it first. I want us to have these as soon as possible, if not tomorrow. So I'm going to suggest 2035 because it's really rare that we get so much agreement. Okay. Have a good night.
Commissioner Heckman.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like 2025, right? But, and I'm not averse to 2035, of course. And I do like the way that it was explained by Vice Chair Aiken that the goal is tomorrow, but let's put some teeth in as a reason to go to 2035. My concern is again, sort of trying to be realistic and recognizing that the easier part of this, in my view, is going to be to rewrite the policies in the programs. The hard part is going to make physical changes to our network of roadways that runs throughout the city. And that just takes time. It's not going to happen. We're not going to do a blueprint for the whole city and then send out crews on a Tuesday to start the work and be done in a month. And then the whole city will be different, right? It's going to be piecemeal here and there. And we're going to start with the high injury roadways. And so for example, I live close to Embarcadero. That's one of our high injury roadways. And the reason is you have in part, you have high speeds combined with many cross intersections that are unsignalized. And you compare that to Oregon Expressway, which has probably higher speeds, but fewer of those intersections. So what are we going to do on Embarcadero? Well, we may end up closing off some of those roads where they meet Embarcadero so that, people who are at the end there are going to be kind of right by Embarcadero, but at a dead end, you're gonna have to go out to Channing or California and loop around to some other place. And so this gets to another point that the vice chair was making, and that is you're gonna shift traffic. And when you do that, the places that had been high injury roadways will maybe be tamped down, and we'll have new high injury roadways, and we'll need to address those with more physical improvements to get to zero KSI. And so that is a very iterative, time-consuming, slow process. And that's why I'm thinking of 2040. But having said that, I mean, obviously there's not a person in the city who doesn't want fewer injuries sooner. And I guess part of maybe the way to solve this, and I think this is the chair's suggestion, is to look at the language of that resolution to make clear that the goal is everybody wants this to end tomorrow, but when can we realistically have it happen to our city? The only other thing I wanted to mention, because this concept of education has been talked about a bit, quite a bit, but I thought it was interesting in one of the early slides from our presentation, this in this Safe Streets program, it's kind of a paradigm shift about in how we're thinking about making our streets safe. And so and we have that graphic that showed sort of the old way and the arrows to the new way, right? Well, one of the old ways was education, right? We're going to teach people don't speed. We're going to teach people look both ways. Well, what we've learned is even though we've taught them, people still speed. And even though everybody knows to look both ways, sometimes you forget and people make mistakes. And so now we are going to assume that people make mistakes and try to protect them essentially from themselves through traffic calming, slowing speeds, those sorts of things. And it may be that the draft plan, I really didn't look for this, doesn't emphasize enough the fact that there's still going to be education. I mean, that's still critical. But obviously that's a component of it. And we heard staff tonight just just in answering questions, talk about education. So maybe take a look at the draft plan and see if we need to make that clear that, of course, a robust education is also a critical component of this, even though it's not one of those 5 new arrows. So those are my comments. Thanks again for a great start.
Could I comment on that? Thanks so much for that comment. Yes, yes, that is exactly how I read the plan. And then our Safe Routes to School lead coordinator read it and read it completely differently and read it the way that I think that Penny Elson read it, thinking that we were going to stop educating children. That is absolutely not what we are going to do. And if you noticed in these slides that were presented tonight, the pyramid actually doesn't have education at the top. It has awareness campaigns or something like that. And I think that misnomer, that's a misnomer in the plan. It's not education, it's awareness, campaigns that don't really. Oh, thank you for putting that up. Thanks, Ashley. Awareness measures, that's what it is. So Ashley and I have talked about this. We've talked to, leaders nationally in the field. They agree that this education name, that up here, it's wrong. So we're going to fix it in the document. Thank you for pointing that out.
Vice Chair Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll wrap up with a few quick and mostly easier observations. Things that I really liked, the references to proactive data collection and analysis, upgrading the traffic calming program as part of this effort, big plus. It's interesting to see bicycle traffic calming mentioned in a few places, which is the first time I've run into that. But given feedback that people have expressed to me personally, I think they're going to be receptive that addresses issues that some have raised. And last but not least, the safe system pyramid really just doesn't work for me. Graphically, the pyramid shape clashes with the arrows. It's really hard to tell which direction is important, which layer is important. Are they all equally important? I can't tell. So as a tool for communicating, I don't think it succeeds. And I toyed with a few other ideas and didn't come to any conclusions, but even if you had a simple list that's unordered, you could probably express the key concepts more simply and less ambiguously. All right, I think that's all that's on my list.
Let me just chime in quickly on the pyramid, because when I read the down arrow, I thought that that was like decreasing impact or benefit. And I don't think that was it was like the impact increases as the arrow goes down, but that is not intuitive. So it took me a while to just kind of, yeah.
I will pile on normally I like a pyramid, and I also want to point out on page, what is it, 63, the funding visual. I had to ask several people with PhDs, some of whom I live with, to explain that to me, and couldn't do it. Some of these graphics, they're pretty, but they're hard to understand. And this is it's on 63, the existing spending. I mean, if those are supposed to be, I just don't think it's clear. I think some of the graphics were getting a little overly clever or something. And there's a lot obviously in here that's good. I do feel slightly bad that I will not have time before the end of this meeting to go through all of the details in Ms. Elson's work, because she seems to have a very keen understanding, and not that she got everything right, but a keen understanding and a lot of experience in Palo Alto with these issues. But I don't think you want us to go through it in that level of detail anyway. I mean, that would take a week, like I said. So I think making this report more action-oriented and clearer, and I'm down with a decade. And I didn't think of the ideas about how to improve the resolution, but I like what was mentioned before to give more urgency. And yeah, I think it needs to be simplified, and the paragraphs on kinetics and why it's bad to be hit by a car if you're on a bike or a person, were a little bit unnecessary to me. I think it would be easier for the public to consume if it was simplified and more action oriented. So thanks.
So I just wanted to do two really specific things. So for page 10. So the first bullet says create a citywide speed management plan. Great. But why isn't the first bullet like address the problem, or address the high injury network? So that's what I mean by we already know where the problems are. So that's what I mean by action oriented. And I know that the citywide speed management plan is with an eye to addressing the high injury network. But I think that in terms of, this plan talks a lot about the things, the costs that we will have to pay, loss of parking spaces, slowing things down, maybe losing some lanes here. But if we get to say but we're addressing these injury networks, I think that will make people, that's a good trade-off, right? Similarly, it might be helpful to have a few boxes in your executive summary section that kind of talk about some of the successes, right? So for example, concretely, earlier today, yesterday, we talked about the Charleston Aristero. And yes, we had a little bit lower LOS, but we also increased throughput, decreased accidents. And that's an example of what implementing a safe systems approach does. And so that could be helpful in sort of explaining what the trade-offs really are, because in reading it, it's hard. I mean, you assume that we're not going to take traffic speeds down to 0. That would make things infinitely safe and also like would completely not fulfill our transportation goals, or but that kind of makes it a little more concrete for people what we're talking about. Okay, so that's about it for me. And I'm not seeing other lights, so I think we are done. Do you need a motion for the 2035? Okay, yeah, I know it's a study session, but sometimes they like motions. Okay, great. Fantastic. Then I think we're on to our last agenda item, which is or second to last agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes of December 11th, 2024. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll motion to move that with any corrections that were made.
Second, please.
Second.
Great. Any discussion? Nope. All right, Ms. Dow, can you call the vote, I guess, because I'm not sure what we're allowed to do here, but
You
Commissioner.
should be able to just say all in favor.
Okay, great.
Aye.
Just noting that Commissioner Tumbleton had to leave, so she won't be taking part of the taking part in the voice vote. All in favor of approving the minutes of December 11th, 2024 as corrected?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. And then our final agenda item is commissioner questions, comments, announcements, or future meetings and agendas. Anybody? Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to mention for the vast audience, I'm sure is still watching, and everyone here in the room, that if you haven't recently done it, you should go see the new Mercedes dealership building, which is rising at the, it's risen at the corner of Bayshore and Embarcadero, the former Ming's site. They have, so it's almost done, and they have this beautiful green wall on the Bayshore side that wraps around the corner of the building, and it's gorgeous. I don't know. I don't know that we have another green wall in the city. I'm not aware of it, but anyway, this one is freshly planted, so everything's living, and it's a great time to go see it. And if you're going to go do that, I would encourage you to ride your bike, because if you do that, you will experience the new bike lane that wraps that corner. 10 feet wide, and as you might recall, this project came to us, and I was hoping that we could save the 10 trees along Bayshore for a somewhat smaller path through there. That didn't happen, but you know, they've planted everything, and it's really nice to have that path, particularly at the corner where if you wanted to ride the sidewalk before to stay off the kind of dangerous street, which narrowed there, you had to make your way around a utility pole. So it was kind of challenging. So now it's super easy. And if you're already there on that corner on your bike, you should just keep pedaling over to the Renzel Ponds, where earlier this week they completed the trim back of all the vegetation around both ponds, which had been seriously overgrown to the point where you really almost could never see the pond, even though you're right next to it, because it was so successful and lush. And it was kind of closing in on the trail and making things feel not quite safe, but now it's wide open. And so I appreciate our I don't know if that's Public Works or Parks that did that work, but they did a great job. And so continue your bike ride through the Renzel Pond area.
All right, we are adjourned.